All right, so today we have Benjamin Moss, who I we didn't meet right away, but you kind of entered my reality, my consciousness in sort of a synchronistic way. I had been talking about Iboga. I've done a couple episodes on Iboga and my experience with microdosing it. And it was funny because one of the things that I was talking about was how when I started microdosing, I noticed what I experienced was that I had more synchronicities happening in my life, and who knows if that's real or whatever, but that was my perception. And as that was happening, as these sort of synchronicities were lining up, good friend of mine met Benjamin, and you guys were talking, and it came up that you were visiting Thailand to do an Iboga retreat up in Chiang Mai. And so that's how we got so then we connected because we were both kind of on this Iboga thread. And so I found that really interesting, but but we didn't have a chance to connect until now. So now you have done the Iboga retreat, you've come back to Kopangan, and then now we've finally we actually ran into each other at Ecstatic Dance the other day. And so thanks for coming on the show.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me, Dan.
And yeah, so really I really wanted to talk to you about your experience with Iboga, and and really for you to share your story. And so I guess the first thing that I'm wondering is how did you get introduced to Iboga?
I at first heard about Iboga a long time ago. It was back probably around 2012 when I first moved down to the Nevada City area in California where I live, and was living with this couple, and they were hosting a lot of ayahuasca retreats at their place. Um, and I would say about every other month, this couple would come from Hawaii and throw some ayahuasca circles. And because I lived there and was helping out with the retreats, they allowed me to sit. And it was the man throwing the ayahuasca circles that first brought up this Iboga. And he described it as kind of like the ayahuasca of Africa. And I was like, there's another ayahuasca?
Like there's
I was like, what? Like, I thought ayahuasca was like, the thing. And, but he described it more as like it was the grandfather, and then ayahuasca was the grandmother sort of thing. And it was, so that immediately was very intriguing to me. It was like, okay, there's something from Africa, this plant, unknown origin and effects. And he described his experience with it, in which he said that there was a moment in his journey where the face of every single person he'd ever seen in his entire life would flash before his eyes, like one by one. And it wasn't just people like his relatives or his friends. It was even every face he'd ever seen on a bus and walking by in a street. Somehow he remembered who they were and when he saw them. It just sort of blew my mind that someone could have an experience like that. So that was my first like introduction of it. And then, I didn't pursue it too much at the time. I just remembered it. And then later, it was when I first heard about it, it became sort of a treatment that people were hosting clinics for in the synthesized version of Ibogaine, and that people were using it to, like heroin addicts were coming and having a huge success rate of getting off heroin. And I was like, wow. So it just blew my mind that that was something that existed out there.
Right.
Yeah.
And so then what happened that led you to doing it, to coming out to Thailand and doing the retreat?
Well,
I know this is like a big story.
it is a very big story.
Yeah. Loaded question.
So interestingly, we'll start with my introduction to in those same circles that I was sitting with ayahuasca. I sat with a woman who was in the circle because she said she was trying to get rid of her addiction to a drug called GHB. I had never heard of this drug. I didn't know it was something that people could get addicted to. I was just like sitting in an ayahuasca circle, and this woman was admittedly trying to get off this drug. And I didn't ever think too much of it at the time. But years later, I was offered this drug once from a friend at a dance party. And I was like, yeah, I'll try anything once. And I didn't like it at all. I was like, for some reason, it was a really bad experience. And I had it in my mind, that's not for me, I will never do it. And then sometime later, I was at the Oregon Country Fair, of all places, and I met this really beautiful woman, and we were hanging out, and she was like, offered it to me again. I was like, no, that's definitely not for me. And then she, later on, she was like, I think you should really try it, just with me. It'll be fun. So I was like, all right, fine with you, like it could be fun. And we, it was, yeah, it was a very unique experience that completely like changed the direction of my relationship with that woman into a full speed. Like all of a sudden it was completely on, and it was like one of the most just profound weekends I've had, like with a woman, as far as like going really deep really quickly. So it changed my perception of the substance. So I just want to give like a quick kind of, I've been talking with a lot of people about this now, the GHB sort of issue, and I've realized a lot of people don't even know what it is. So
yeah.
First and foremost, it's actually a naturally occurring compound in the human brain.
Oh, interesting.
It's a neurotransmitter that we have in small amounts in our brain already.
Okay.
And it means it's gamma hydroxy butyric acid.
Okay.
So it was first synthesized back in the 1950s by a doctor, and he was using it going to give to people with narcolepsy, because it produces, it makes your brain go into a deep sleep, basically in a certain dosage. People with narcolepsy, they have a hard time staying asleep. They fall asleep, randomly in places, but they can't really stay asleep. So if you take the certain amount of GHB, you'll stay asleep for longer. So that happened in the 1950s. You can still get prescription GHB for narcolepsy today.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's like medical grade, And then in the 80s, like the 70s in the 80s, it also produces a growth hormone in the body. So people started using it for weightlifting back in the 70s and 80s, and became kind of like a weightlifting drug. You could buy it in health food stores.
That seems so counterintuitive, though, because it's like, I think of it, I don't know much about it, but I think of it as a sleepy drug, like kind of like an alcohol, like drunky, sleepy, it seems like when I see people on it, they're usually passed out or
right.
or like half passed out.
And
like,
it's the thing about it, it's a very dose specific drug.
Okay.
If you don't take enough, you're not going to feel anything. If you take the right amount, you're going to feel very euphoric, very energized, very socially lubricated.
Okay.
Kind of like all the good things you're going to feel on alcohol. Of course, your boundaries go out the window. You become very like sexually interested in lots of things.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And then there's a threshold if you take a little bit more than that amount, all of a sudden you will become very sleepy, and often you can just pass out without even realizing you're passing out, and then even to a point where you can fall asleep and not be able to be woken up, which is what people discovered, and unfortunately, stupid people doing stupid things. In the 90s, a lot of people started using it to date rape people.
Right.
And it became known as a date rape drug, and therefore the U.S. government was like, this shit is dangerous, and we need to make it a Schedule 1.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's a brief history. It's still very illegal all over the world, and it is addictive. It does have addictive properties, which I knew.
Is there a tolerance that builds up?
There is a slight tolerance.
Okay.
When I started taking it, I was taking the lowest amount, and my tolerance slowly went up to pretty much about double what I first started taking, and then it just kind of like hit a wall where I couldn't. That was the amount that stayed with me from that moment on. I knew my dosage, and it would fluctuate. Of course, there's varying degrees of potency, like with any drug. So, yeah, it hit a wall of like that was my dose. But yeah, so after that weekend with that woman, I was like, wow, this stuff is a lot of fun. I mean, it was like there's the thing with they say a lot of drugs is when you first start taking them, the level of fun and money is very high, or the amount of money involved is
Right.
low.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
amount
yeah.
of fun is high.
You have this much money and this much fun.
Yes. And then very quickly it goes in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
I started off just using it as socially because it sort of did for me what no other drug had done before, and it made me extremely social. I grew up being very introverted, very quiet child. So I had a lot of hard times in social situations. I'm very good at like one-on-one with people, but when it comes to group situations and people I don't know, I tend to be very quiet. So in the right dosage, it made me very social and very outgoing, and therefore I fell in love with it and started using it to go out dancing. And then I was like, oh, you can use this for exercise too. And I started using it to go running. I was like,
Oh, wow.
yeah. It's like, oh, this is great. It's going to be lots of energy. I can run even farther than I normally do. And then sometimes I would take it to go to yoga class.
Oh, interesting.
And then, of course, it's pretty expensive when you're buying small quantities of it. So a lot of times with drugs, you're paying for that moderation. And I was like, well, if I buy more, I'll pay less and it'll be more efficient. And to the point where I would buy, I got to the point where I would be like, oh, if I buy a gallon of it,
Oh, man.
then I'm paying like half the price that I normally would. This is great.
Wow.
Yeah, and that that was kind of a turning point in that. And then I met this woman that I fell in love with, and I really wanted to. She was coming to work with me, and I really wanted to impress her. And I knew like her previous relationship with this very outgoing, energetic, boisterous, kind of like big dick energy kind of guy, and so I was like, well, I guess that's what she likes, So I was like, okay, well, when she's hanging out with me, I've got all this G. I'm just gonna like take it all the time while she's hanging out with me, and just really impress her a lot. So that's when I started the amount in which the times where I was like using it to live was increasing. And so I started taking it, I guess, on a daily basis because she was with me all the time.
Wow.
And then we moved in together. So I just had to keep wanted to keep taking it
Did
to
did
keep up.
she know that you were doing this?
She knew I liked it. Sometimes I would share it with her. She liked to do it every now and then. Um, to this day, she doesn't know the extent of which I like. Later on, after I lived with her and started taking it daily, and it got to the maximum point where I would have it with my morning coffee.
Mm.
It would last 2 hours, and I would redose every 2 hours throughout the day,
Mm.
every day.
Wow.
And then it got to the point where I would wake up and I realized I needed also to sleep. So I needed to take 2 doses every night to have a full night of sleep.
Wow.
And at that point, there was a moment I was like, that was the first time my brain was kind of like, saw that this was becoming a potential problem. Because I was becoming dependent on it for just to like have a night of sleep, and to hang out. But it was still never quite like, very much in denial and not looking at where the situation was going.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there were times where I would take too much and randomly fall asleep in her presence or doing random things. There would be times where we would be at a party, at a festival, and I would pass out. Yeah, it eventually, she saw it was a problem at one point, and our relationship ended. There was other factors, but that was definitely a huge one. So yeah, I became a drug addict, basically. It was never something that I chose. It just sort of happened.
Yeah.
Just realized like, oh shit. By the time you realize it, it's kind of like too late, and the energy of addiction has taken over, and you've lost control. It was a slow process that happened over a couple of years, and I would say over the course of 6-7 years, I was very dependent on it.
6 or 7 years.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the time of when I first took it with that woman at the Oregon Country Fair,
Yeah.
to a couple months ago when I did the Iboga retreat. It was somewhere in the line of 6 to 7 years.
Wow. And okay, so then what led you to the retreat? Like how did you break out of the pattern?
Well, I had tried I was hoping on my own, just from like things like my relationship with this person I was in love with falling apart, being like, this is really starting to affect my relationships. And there was a lot of other things that would happen. There were a few times where I just lost all my money, and I couldn't keep using because I couldn't afford it anymore. So I had to stop. And also every time I stopped using, the effects that I would experience coming off of the drug became worse. At first, it was pretty mild. And then I would keep getting back on it for one reason or the other, because for so long I was using it socially, and I'd be like, okay, I'm going to stop. This is affecting my life. But I didn't know how to socialize without it. So eventually I would talk myself into trying a little bit more again. And the cycle just kept happening like that. And I would always tell myself, oh, I just want to use it socially. I just want to use it for exercise, like the way it was in the beginning. Like that like, oh, this is really aiding my life. This is really great. But I've heard it's really similar with alcohol, that once you hit a certain point of the addiction of like needing it all the time, you can't go back. And that's what would happen. Once I would get more, I would just dose after dose after dose until it was gone. There was no, there was never a point where I could moderate any ever again.
Yeah.
That was too late. I'd like crossed a threshold, and my ability to moderate it was just, I had no self control with it. And it was the coming off of it was, it started off being days of sleep, or days of I couldn't go to sleep. You know, my brain would have to like kick back into gear of producing its own melatonin again, and that would sometimes take up to 3 days where I was awake, and during that time I would hear auditory hallucinations. I would hear a lot of stuff I didn't understand. I felt like the voice of God came to me at one point, and it sounded like Morgan Freeman.
That could be.
But it was like, it was such a like a auditory hallucination where I'd look around the room and be like, is there Morgan Freeman in my bedroom with me? This is so bizarre. But yeah, I'd hear like screams of humanity that sounded like they were coming from the past. I'd hear my friends talking about me and telling all sorts of lies, and all these like very paranoid situations in which the direction of my life was headed. And I would feel like it's all true. I'd feel like I was like piercing some veil in which I was listening to my friends talking about me behind my back. And then, of course, later I would talk to my friends about this and be like, no, we never said that, honestly, Benjamin. And of course, I started to realize it was kind of like all these like paranoid delusions and lies.
So you did. This is something I've always wondered about, this stuff, like hallucinations and hearing things. Is like, so you were hearing it and you actually believed it, or it's like there wasn't, you know, I mean, yeah. Can you describe that a little bit? Like you actually, like it feels real.
It did feel very real, but it was not the effects of the G that caused these hallucinations. It was something about when I would stop the G and try and sleep again. And then when I lay down at night in the darkness, that it was my brain's like sleep engine trying to kick back on, that's when these things would happen. And I've heard this can happen with other, there's like a name for it. It happens with other drugs when people are coming off of them. But yeah,
And so, but so you're laying in bed, you're hearing these things,
yeah.
and it like, do you know that it like does it? What I imagine is that it would be like, oh, these are things that I'm hearing from another dimension, and that they're real. That like they're not like in the room, or you know, they're not physically sound waves in physical space, but whatever I'm hearing is like it's coming from somewhere, like it's a real thing from another dimension. Is that
I thought that was completely what was happening.
and rather than being like, oh, this is like I'm just hallucinating, none of this is real.
I thought I was hearing, I was piercing some. It seemed so real. I thought I was listening to, it's like screams of humans being tortured in the past. It would go on for hours. I would lay there for nights just being like, what am I hearing? It was just like humans screaming, like it sounds like slaves, or like the past suffering of all of humanity. It was very bizarre. I was just like, listen to it, and that's what it sounded like to me. It's like some hellish realm of suffering.
Now, like today, what do you make of that? Do you think that in some capacity, some dimension, that it is? I mean, real is a loaded word, but it's like the thing to me that I not struggle with, but that I find it's interesting is like this information came from somewhere. Like you heard it. It's, you know, you had the experience of this, and it's like you could say, well, it's psychosis, it's delusional, it's a hallucination, but regardless, it still happened, and it's like it was fabricated somewhere, and and so I almost, I just wonder if like, if in some way you are piercing some veil where it's like, I don't know, like it is a dimension, or it's like, or like maybe it's like coming, maybe it's some your subconscious, and it's like it's like torturing sounds and death and evil or something could be coming from like you're going through a process of like your body is physically in withdrawal from this thing, and so you're, I don't know, but it's like, what what do you, what do you make of it?
It's interesting because, well, to touch on I never the addiction with GHB, it seemed to be mostly a mental thing. I never felt any cravings for it physically, only energetically, as far as like needing it to exist publicly. So what I was experiencing during that time was a transformation of my consciousness, going from an induced substance back to the natural one, and the two things I had heard mostly were all these screams that were happening, which did not ever feel like they were coming from me. There was something I've never imagined. They were voices I was hearing so clearly. It seems like it was a dream, and I guess from what I can perceive, everything that we can think, everything we dream, like the Matrix, or every thought, like the multiverse of reality, everything within our mind exists in some dimension of reality, almost just as real, or if not more real, with our dreams than this reality. So it exists somewhere, what I experienced. I do feel like it was some sort of veil that I saw through in some weird way, because I just don't know where it came from, and I've never like imagined those things. And then it was almost like it was showing me things about, and then all the paranoia I felt about my friends talking about behind my back was the situations that I would do when I was on G, and where that was leading my life to go, because I became a very different person on G. I called it my G-go. It was my ego on G.
Yeah.
I was like, it was me amplified in a very impatient, sexually driven, rude, clumsy person, which I thought was me being more socially active, but it was a lie.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like showing me what could have happened in the worst possible way of if I would have like the things I was creating in my life from the Jigo of like what really could damage my life. And it made me very paranoid. So it had an intelligence to it. It wasn't just like a random kaleidoscope dream-like thing. It was like sort of showing me these situations and different like timelines, if you will, or realities that, what could have been
Wow.
in certain situations of that happening in my life. And I mean, I am really lucky to be here, honestly, even today. I could have easily died many times. There was a point where I was drinking a lot on it too, which is the known fatality of mixing GHB and alcohol. It can easily kill you.
Yeah, that's like, it's like the one thing you do not do is drink
And
alcohol.
I started testing it and be like, okay, I can get away with this much. I can get away with this much.
Wow.
And there were times where like I would just be talking to my friends and just pass out. And they'd be like, oh my God. And they knew I was drinking. And then like, they're like, why is he passing out too? Like randomly. And there were times I was driving on it and should have been, and could have easily killed myself or somebody else. There were times where I woke up in people's yards with a cop over me, wondering why I was sleeping in somebody's yard. And I had on me, and luckily I'm a good liar and just talked my way out of it and being like, oh, I just fell asleep in this person's yard, and if you would have searched me, I'd be in jail right now.
Wow.
Yeah.
So was that like the low point? Would you say?
I mean, there was a lot of them.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
so I guess like I mean, I'm sure we could go into that for days, but
Yeah.
like I guess at what point did you okay, so you were trying to quit, kept falling back into the pattern, and then what led you to actually like finally break out and go to the retreat?
It was something that I had thought about years ago, and because of what I had read about it online of people, it being something like I'd done the ayahuasca like 50 times, and it had an amazing effect on me. It was never something that sort of cleared all the roots out of any patterns. And just reading about that people were actually like they were setting up clinics for it, like actually legal clinics in both Mexico and Canada, especially.
For Iboga.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it's still considered like, oh, it's a
Yes.
psychedelic in the United States. We're not gonna even touch that. Like,
Right.
we
Yeah,
don't know
they-
anything about it, but because it has psychoactive properties, it's obviously bad.
Right. Yeah. Just to clarify, like in the U.S., it's like I don't know if it's a Schedule 1, but it's like highly illegal.
Right.
It's super like nobody can touch it. Nobody can do studies on it. Nobody can go near it. Meanwhile, in other in Mexico, in Thailand, in these other parts of the world, there are incredible success stories where like people are like time and time and time again working with this medicine and breaking horrible addictions.
Yeah.
So
And that's what made me think it was like, a ray of hope. And being that it's comes from a plant, like I was really been inspired by just the, I guess from experiencing a lot of ayahuasca, of like the intelligence that is beyond me that can come from a plant, and seems to somehow understand me and my own intelligence in a way of like, being in ayahuasca ceremonies of it being shown like visions of what happened to me as a child, memories I didn't even know I never remembered, and being like, how could this plant guide me to parts of my consciousness like that? It's like a intelligence beyond me. That was very fascinating. So of course I was like, well, if there's another ayahuasca like this that can also has a track record, of many people using it to act and like not relapsing, going, curing them of their addiction like that, and them never going back to it. I was like, wow, something about it. I was like, I knew that could help me. So unfortunately, I got stuck of like, okay, well, it does have a thing where there's a little bit of a rarity to it. It's a lot more rare, harder to find than ayahuasca, and a little bit of a privilege to it, because a lot of these retreats, they cost a lot of money to attend. So I needed to have the time and finances and space to be able to go and try something like that out. So it took me a couple of years and to work a couple of years to finally get here. I was first going to go down to Mexico to do it, but some of the retreats down there were pretty expensive. And I'd been to Thailand before, so I was like, well, I love Thailand. I was like, what if maybe they have one there? And I happened to find a retreat here that did it. It's called the Roots Healing Center, and they had some openings, so I decided to finally give it a try. I was like, this is my last hope. And that's what brought me here today.
Okay, so So, how long ago was that you did the retreat?
It is the middle of August right now. I did it in the middle of June, so 2 months
So
ago.
2 months. Okay.
Hmm.
Yeah. And so what was the retreat like? What was that experience?
Well, I was originally supposed to. I'm going to talk about this interesting synchronicity because you had mentioned that, and how very unique I had a synchronicity with it was I was originally scheduled to do it back in April. I first got into Thailand in March. I was supposed to do it in April, but unfortunately, I had stepped on a piece of coral in the ocean and cut my foot, and it got infected. So I went on some antibiotics, and these particular antibiotics, I was like going into the read. I was like, they want you to communicate all medications you're on. So I told them, I'm like, oh yeah, that's fine. And then they came back and they're like, wait, which antibiotic are you on? And I'm like, oh, this one. And they're like, oh, actually, that's the one antibiotic that can be detrimental to your heart if over a period of time, and because Iboga can sort of slow your heart rate. They're like that. We don't want to. Unfortunately, you can't come to this particular retreat, so we're gonna have to delay your retreat. So I was pretty bummed, obviously.
Is that why you came to Kopangan?
For
Because it got delayed, or
no, I was here already.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted. I'd always heard about this island and how great it was. So I just wanted to check it out. 'Cause it's the famous Kopangan.
Right.
So the day that I was supposed to go to the retreat, I met this woman, and somehow she, I was like, it's pretty rare that I'll ever approach a woman, but she came up to me, and I was like, okay, and we started talking, and somehow GHB came up, and she's like, oh yeah, geez, like, you don't want to know where I've been with that. I'm like, wait, what? Yeah, me too. I've gone pretty far with it. She's like, no, I've really gone far. And I'm like, no, you haven't gone as far as I've gone with it. She's like, no.
Outdoing each other.
And we had this thing. We're like, really? She's like, yeah. So we're like, we should talk about this. And so we eventually did. And we talked, we hung out and we talked about it. And she's like, yeah, I'm still addicted. And I'm like, yeah, me too. And I'm like, wow, I think I've only met actually one other person in my life who's gone as far with it as I have, to be like, as addicted, like taking it all the time for a period of time. Like, you can't take any more than, or otherwise you'd just be asleep all the time. Right. A functioning drug addict in some level. Yeah, so we met and we ended up talking, and she told me about how she kind of accidentally also got addicted to it, of course. And the woman that introduced her to it was the same woman that I originally sat with in the ayahuasca circle that I first heard about it.
Wow.
Yeah. And it,
like 12 years ago?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
we were just blown away by that. We're like, what? So, I couldn't believe it. And so we became really good friends. Me and this woman I just met, and I was like, well, I'm going to this Iboga retreat. Like, you should really do this too. And she's was like, I can't afford that, But I was like, okay, well, I'll go and I'll tell you how it is, and we'll see what happens. So it was then a couple months later, they rescheduled me at the retreat for June. So I had to wait until that time. And it was during that time, of course, like I was still in it. I was here in Party Island, and I had gained access to it again, and went through, had some pretty like moments with it. where I sort of pushed the veil of dumb shit that I had done on it, where I'd like did things I normally wouldn't do, and really like came up with some serious like that was dumb. I really regret that, and kind of like binged. Had like one last like okay. I'm gonna do the Iboga. I'm gonna have one last binge right before, right?
Man,
Like,
that's what it's like. Classic.
Yeah.
Yeah, classic.
yeah, and then so I didn't realize like how much I was actually doing it, but over the time of a week, I definitely was, got to that point and had to go through the experience of getting off of it one last time, and like I said, it became worse and worse sort of every time. And what I was experiencing after a certain point, the auditory hallucinations shut off, and it then became a period of days in which I just had to lay there in bed, and I experienced, I would say, some of the oddest, weirdest, scariest sensations that I could ever have imagined. It was kind of like my whole neuro system was firing back on, starting with my brain going all around my head. I could feel my pineal gland like kind of like cleanse itself and push all the toxins out of it in a like weird spider web sort of effect. It would be like open itself back up, and then it would happen throughout my entire body. Like it would go through my like anus and kind of like spiral all around, and then it was like all my nerves like firing back on, and it was weird. And then there'd be like other weird stuff happening with my neck, where like my veins would like be popping out, and like the fluids would like go back from my heart to my head. And there was one point I thought I was gonna die, and I actually had my friend take me to the emergency room.
Oh wow.
And then when I told him it was happening, he's like, "Oh, you're fine. That's just what happens when you're getting off G. Like you think you're gonna die, but you're fine. Don't worry. Trust me, you're fine." I'm like, "Okay, I feel like I'm gonna die." So it was the last time here on Copenhagen I went through that series of one last time of getting off it, and it was the worst I'd ever experienced. It was so bizarre. I felt like I was in some alien operating room, that there was like extra dimensional beings kind of like healing me in a weird way. Also, like I was like piercing the veil of like, what is happening? How does my body know how to like reboot itself? But I was like, this is it. So there was that, and then yeah, finally in June, went to the retreat center up near Chiang Mai. And I was kind of nervous going into it. I was like, there's a lot of information about Iboga, and the, the length of the experience, I would say, they're like, oh, it's 18 or 36 hours. And, your whole life flashes before your eyes, and it's a very powerful psychedelic. And so I was like, oh, shoot, am I ready? Like, I kind of... they're like, you got to be off drugs like at least 2 weeks before this, and I think I pushed it a little bit. Of course, it's like, but yeah, I got there, and yeah, I was as ready as I was gonna be, I guess, at that point.
Yeah.
But I was very excited, also scared, nervous, but excited. This like very infamous plant, wholly new experience.
Yeah. So I guess what happened? You did you just do a ceremony, or like, was it only you?
It was they wanted to keep it small, so there was 5 other people in the retreat. And they had a very strong intention. They wanted to make it as good for people as they could. So they actually were like, we're taking your phones. And it was an amazing, beautiful retreat center. It was like very plush and like gorgeous. You're just like, whoa, this is like a swimming pool. And
what was the name of the retreat center?
Well, I went through. It's called the Root Healing Center, but they were just renting it.
Okay.
So it's not the actual name of the center, but the man and the people that were renting it.
Right.
And
Okay.
throwing those particular retreats there.
Okay.
And yeah, so they were like telling us it was scheduled to be 2 different nights ceremonies. So like they found in their experience that you kind of one is good, but to really go deep, you kind of need 2, especially if you have a history of drug use. They explain kind of like it's sort of this very powerful master detox of both the body and the mind. And if you have a lot of toxins from drugs, GHB is particularly toxic. I mean, just to give an example, it's made from GBL, which is an industrial cleaner used to clean car parts.
Okay.
So if anyone's thinking like, well, I should try this, it's corrosive, don't. I can't believe I made like, I can't believe I'm even here in a sense of, drinking gallons of an industrial cleaner. But here I am.
Right.
So I was like, okay. So they're like, the first ceremony is probably going to just be like a detox sort of thing. I was like, all right. They're like, it'll be, not a lot might happen. So that's exactly kind of what I felt. It was a very intentional and beautifully put together ceremony. Like it was very, they wanted it to be as close to the tradition of the Bwiti tribe as possible. The tribe from a very old ancient tribe from Africa who first discovered this plant accidentally from ingesting a porcupine that had eaten the plant and experiencing some mild effects from the porcupine.
What?
Yeah, that's this ancient story of
Wow.
like this woman just ate a porcupine, and she's like, "Whoa, this, I feel like woozy from the porcupine." Like, what was that? Like, I didn't take anything else. Like, it's just, and they're like, "Okay, we're gonna investigate this." So they went back to where she found the porcupine, and then they noticed some chew marks on the root of this plant. So then they're like, all right, well, let's try and eat this plant. So they tried to eat the plant again, and of course, all of a sudden they're like, whoa, this is an amazing thing where all of a sudden, it makes you feel like a wooziness to it, and then it creates this whole journey of psychoactivity. So yeah, that's the thing about it, is it's not technically like it's interesting that a lot of people compare it to ayahuasca because it doesn't have the DMT, it doesn't have the psilocybin, no mescaline, there's no psychedelic compound within it. It is alkaloids, a complex series of alkaloids, and that even the synthesized version ibogaine is just an alkaloid. So it's a very mysterious thing, and of why it has the psychoactive power that it does. And they, so we had a fire ceremony, and we all stated our intentions, and they wanted to be very precise about that. Like, we wrote our intentions out, and we spoke them to the fire, to the plant, and I think that was a huge part of it. I mean, me going into it, I was like, this is it. Like, this is, I don't want to ever touch G again. This has to be it. So my intention was like very clear. And they played the traditional music the whole time from the tribe. The man actually had recorded his own journeys with it back in Gabon, Africa. And it was very, interesting music. Like the instruments were kind of like a mouth harp. Was the main one, so it's kind of like boing 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 music for like hours, basically.
Yeah, the music is like, it's not like I wouldn't prefer to listen to it.
No,
Yeah.
no. It's not your casual like driving down the road music. It's strictly meant for that situation.
Yeah.
And it has a magic to it though in that situation, because it's actually, you can, listening to it, it's almost like the vibrations of those instruments are kind of like working with, they described as what is happening on energetic levels is it's the spirit of the plant that is entering you, and that is what is working the magic, detoxifying your mind and your body. And so it's like the spirit and the music are like boing, boing, boing around in your brain, collecting all your thoughts, your memories, your toxic behaviors, and sort of like bouncing around your brain, collecting them. They're all kind of like going across your consciousness as this is happening, which is what I saw. It was a lot more mild than like the ayahuasca. It was very colorful with the DMT of the ayahuasca. You see like the visions and the colors, and but this was very monochromatic experience. Like I saw it, but it was very subtle.
And now, when you say you saw, is this like when you close your eyes and you have like a dreamlike vision, or is this like how do you see?
Yeah, I mean we all had blindfolds on, or like face masks. We're all lying down, sort of in a shavasana pose with our arms out, in our own beds, and everyone's like a very personal experience. So it's kind of like it's completely dark, your eyes are closed, and it's dreamlike, but it wouldn't be like as encapsulating as a dream would be, where you're like in that reality. You're just kind of like seeing it in some sort of subtle vision going through your dark closed eyes consciousness.
And so like, are you seeing people or situations or landscapes, or
it was like it was a lot of my memories, but it was so fast and mysterious and elusive. It was hard to like grasp sort of any particular thing about it. I was just kind of like, this is happening, and this is all my consciousness is going through this, but I can't quite intellectually understand it. It was like a journey. It was unfolding before me. I was experiencing some auditory hallucinations also. The music sounded like it was at some points it would be coming from other directions, going around me. I think I was hearing some voices. So it does have some psychedelic properties to it. And then it creates another effect called ataxia. Yeah. Which you kind of lose some cognitive abilities to walk a little bit.
I've heard of that. Yeah.
So there's people in the ceremony who are like, okay, if you need to go to the restroom, raise your hand. We'll come and we'll like guide you. Like, like you don't have like you're a drunk person or something, like it needs help to go somewhere, like holding your arm. But yeah, it kind of creates like a strobe like effect, in which you're like you just can't quite walk normally, and it's very trippy. Like there's nothing scary about it. It's just like, wow, this is particularly challenging to do this basic thing that I do every day. It feels funny.
And so what? How did it? Like, how did it work? Like what did it? Because from what we've talked about previously, it sounds like you're no longer addicted to GHB where you're using it.
Right.
And it so it's like how like what happened in there that shifted? Like what changed?
Well, so the first ceremony, was very mild. I experienced like what I was talking about, and I did purge at the end. Like I experienced some nausea right away in the beginning, and then some waves of it throughout it, and then I purged. And the guy throwing the ceremony is like, that was the detox. That was the plant cleansing your body. And then afterwards, it was like after I purged, it was kind of like it kind of like ended the journey there at that point. It was the first one for me, and I was like, well, that was really way more mild than I thought it was going to be. It was pretty chill, and I would almost describe it as like experiencing the ayahuasca part of the brew without the chacruna, without the DMT. So it was like just kind of like a purgative effect, which is mild psychedelic effects. So I was like, okay, that was that. I was like, let's see what happens on the second time. And the second time, I was like, all right, I'm gonna try and drink as much of this as I can. So I was like, I kept asking for more. So I was really wanting to go as far as I could with it, and he gave me as much as he was willing to give me. At one point, he was like, I think you've had enough. I was like, okay, good. As much as I can get. So strangely, it was also the journey with the music. I think it was like 8 hours that we had of just lying there in the dark. Was pretty. A similar thing happened. It was very mild. I experienced lots of my memories, all sorts of things going by. Didn't quite understand. And then it ended, and we go back to our rooms, and we go through what's called the processing day. Where you're just supposed to kind of like process everything that happened, which is basically you just sitting there with nothing to distract you, sort of going through an introspective, emotional journey of what is happening. Somehow, it also it replaces your brain. It does what for your brain what sleep does. So you can go through a period after it of not sleeping. So for the next 4 days, 100 hours, I was laying in that room by myself, just thinking about what had happened.
Not sleeping at all.
No sleep.
For 4 days.
I didn't sleep for over 100 hours.
Wow.
I was not tired. I mean, I would lay down and be like, okay, am I going to sleep now? Nope. Like every now and then throughout the night. But I would just, I've never experienced that before, where it was just like me by myself without any distractions for that length of period of time. And then I started sort of grieving a lot of, I would say, the whole reason, I started doing G in the first place was because I thought it was making me be the person that I wanted to be, a different version of myself that wasn't this shy, introverted person. And I got to a point, when I was just sitting there alone in bed, where I was like, started grieving that part of myself and what I thought I was missing out on in life. The things that I thought were passing me by because of who I was. I just started being like really sad about it. And then the person hosting it, after the 4th day, he came in to check on me, and he was asking what I was going through, and I talked to him about this. And as soon as he came into the room, I felt a shift. There was something interesting happening. And I don't know how he knew, but I think just with his experience of what people are going through with this, he knew exactly what to ask me. And he was just like, well, is there anything beneficial, good, that comes from you being shy and who you are? And just that change of me looking at it in a different way, it was like the ultimate moment and spark that it had all been coming down to, where I saw every benefit, every like superpower from my weirdness that my life had unfolded into a way of like allowing it to be a more observant person, preserving my friendships in a much better way, being someone who's able to be an artist and like being off on my own and creating art for hours at a time, and it just all hit me like in a way I've never thought about before. And like I started just like crying, like a cry of joy, which I've never quite experienced that level of joy before. Like I've cried in ayahuasca in that way sometimes, but it was more like it's just tears of like feeling bliss. But this was like the deepest, most happiest cry I'd ever been on, and it lasted and went on and went on, and it was like it's hard to describe, but it was this purity of my soul, of having just been in my own headspace, my pure consciousness for so long, that I felt more me, more of that childlike, purest essence of me that I can ever remember feeling. And it just made me so happy. I was like, oh my God, like this is who I am, and this is the glory of my own unique weirdness and how amazing it is. And then during this cry, I was like, it hit me that everything I came here to do had somehow happened, and that I had achieved my goal, and that I no longer needed anything else. I no longer was ever gonna do G again. It just, I knew it. Like I knew it. And that made me even more happy. I kept crying. I was like, oh my God, it's over.
Yeah.
It's finally over. I just like knew. Somehow, it's like I could feel the spirit of the plant telling me this, guiding me to this moment. And like, I've never been so sure of something. It's hard to describe. It's a mystery, like how it happened. But just like all the events that unfolding at that point, it's like,
that's so interesting how it comes. It's like it's you were like guided to a moment. It's like
yeah,
this journey to this place, and then in that moment is when it all, there's like the realization. Well, so this is one thing that that I find interesting is like it. So I've never done. I've only done microdosing.
mm-hmm.
So I don't I don't know. But it, from what I've been learning and hearing other people talk about it, it seems like there's this consistent theme that what it guides you to is this like self-acceptance and self-love, and like this like full acceptance of your genuine authenticity, that somehow that's the like what it's like that's what it all kind of hinges on. It's like that's that realization, that point is like when you have this breakthrough and realize that you accept yourself and love yourself for what you are, right? Instead of trying to change it. I feel like possibly the root of the G addiction is this desire to change yourself. This desire, it's like you're not content, you're not happy with who you are, and so you're using something to alter that. Yeah, I don't know. Is that does that sound, is that accurate?
Yeah. I mean, that's completely it. And it's not something that I knew going into it that was going to happen. It's not something I expected. I thought it was going to be a very psychedelic, passive like thing where I would just kind of like see it all happen, or it would happen without like it would just happen in this magical way without my intellect sort of grasping it. But this was more of a very personal, extremely personal, like direct experience of coming to like a very pure, loving state of seeing the good of my weirdness and my uniqueness and like holding it and loving it in a way I've never imagined or considered, but somehow just guiding me to that energy of feeling that like very deeply and authentically. And yeah, I've never felt more like happiness to be who I was, in that moment. And I felt the moment the spirit of like the Iboga entered me, like about 20 minutes, half hour after I first took it. Like there's like, the spirit is going to enter you, and that's what's going to do the work. And I remember that moment of looking at the fire, and suddenly my consciousness kind of like warped, and things became a little bit obscure in the light. I was like, whoa, that's definitely it. And they talk about how with the purity of this plant, it's very sort of not jealous, but particular about it. It doesn't want any other plant medicines or substances to be in you. So it cleanses them all out, and it will stay with you for as long as you remain true to it and remain sober afterwards. And I feel like it still, like to this day, every time I think about it, I can feel it, the spirit of it. I don't know. I'm not someone that's like, I only go off of my own experiences with things. Like I don't believe much about like what other people say about too many things that are metaphysical. It's like, but I've been very skeptical of a lot of things throughout my time. So this was like something I've never like been so sure of the feeling of it, of that it was like something beyond, something very magical and spiritual that was outside of me, that I'm so sure of. That's like, I feel like I've been reborn in a way of like, I'm excited about my life again,
Wow.
from like being like in a desperate hole of not knowing if I was ever going to not be a drug addict, to like every day I wake up and I experience authentic happiness that I didn't know I was going to be like ever happy without drugs. I was like, I'm happy every day. And like, it's magical to me. Just that alone is like, I've achieved something again. I have something to look forward to, and I can, go after my dreams once again. And have a story to tell from it. So, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so as far as the G goes, like what do you think about it? Is it like not even just part of your consciousness anymore, or like what's that relationship?
Well, I mean, I didn't expect it to happen as far as like me not wanting to do any other plant medicine, like even mushrooms or ayahuasca or something, like because of what Iboga has given to my consciousness and how potent I feel it is, that I feel kind of like dedicated to that power alone, that nothing has ever sort of touched on. So I want to be as sober as I can with everything, and do that path right now. Because whenever people ask me, so I have zero, like zero thoughts about using it again, about anything. I've already gone out dancing and been offered drugs multiple times since, and not a second am I like that. Maybe a little bit, I'm just like, no, why would I ever want to do that again? Like, I'm never doing that again. That was crazy. And I tell them, I'm like, no, I've had my allotment for this lifetime. Like, I've done like as many of the drugs like that, like a spirit wants me to do or whatever in this lifetime, and I'm good. I'm over that. I'm on a new path now. So I don't think about doing it at all. Like, and I'm strangely now, like, kind of, but grateful that it happened. As dark and scary as it was, and now, like, talking about it in this, like, very open, public sense, it was something that was, like, my secret for all those years that I would never talk about. Didn't tell my girlfriends, my friends. None of them, like, really knew. I mean, they knew I liked it. They could probably tell, but, like, very few of them actually knew that, like, I was as addicted to it as you possibly could be. So now I'm over it, and I feel, so fresh and excited. So it's in a strange way. It's like, part of the journey, just to be grateful that I went through all that and have finally overcome it.
Yeah, that's amazing, man.
Yeah.
Well, nice work. Congratulations.
Yeah.
That's a lot to go through. Do you have any advice, or like do you have anything to say to people who are I don't know, maybe dealing with addictions or thinking about Iboga as a treatment or something to work with?
I would recommend it to anyone who has the access. If you're dealing with an addiction and you feel lost in that and can't get out of it, why not? Give it a try. You have nothing to lose. Only an experience to be had. And like, the amazing space and freedom that I have now from not having those addictions is, like, cleared so much of my life. Like, there's that feeling of addiction you have, it's called the hungry ghost, of, like, you're always needing that fix to fill the void of what you're missing, and it's just a passing thing that goes through to an empty well where you're never satisfied. Like, it was any addiction, with smoking, with alcohol. Like, it's an illusion of happiness that's like a temporary fleeting fix that's never gonna hold any weight or any pure happiness. So I would recommend, like, trying to get rid of any addictions, to open up your consciousness and allow space for who you are, your pure potential to be able to blossom from, not trying to, like, get your fix all the time for whatever it is. So I, like, of course, set and setting are important. I don't know how the clinical ibogaine experience would be. It's the synthetic version. It's kind of like, I don't know how connected it is to the spirit of the plant, but it scientifically, it seems to be successful. So if that is what you have access to, go for that. But if you can find, a retreat that has, that preserves the plant, that gets it, they're starting to farm Iboga now, I've heard. So I think the age of the plant can matter a lot. I think the ones that, when I got it came from Gabon, and they were 70-year-old plants, and
Oh
they
wow.
tried to harvest them as sustainably as possible, by only taking every 5 years they would go out and just take like a third of the roots from the plant, so that it could grow back after 5 years and maintain its vitality. And then they like protect the plants and stuff too. The tribe does, because now it's becoming popular, so there's a demand for it. But yeah, so there's farmed version. That's the ibogaine, the medical version. But whatever you have access to. There's clinics in Canada, Mexico, and I think in different parts of the world. You can find it word of mouth or research it on the internet. But yeah, you're never gonna get anywhere with addiction. It's just gonna slowly drain your life essence,
Mm.
and it's such an illusion of pleasure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, man. Well, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah. Thank
Good
you.
to
for having me
good to
down.
hear your story.
That was really beautiful, and part of my healing process just to talk about it too publicly. And yeah, thanks for being interested. I really appreciate that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
awesome.
Mhm.